Welcome, everyone, to the future of space, your weekly dose of deep space thinking. I'm Daniel Fox. Today on the podcast is the Overview Effect author, space philosopher, Frank White. Frank, welcome to the future of space. How are you?
I'm doing well, Daniel. It's great to be here. Thanks.
Listen, I want to start with two questions I always ask for each guest. And the first one, even though you've never been to space, you've been looking up to space for many years. Give me three words that describe space for you.
The three words that I would think of are everything, nothing, and home.
Love it. Home. Our current home, future home, or just the
Well,
home in its general.
I'd like to explain that because it comes from an astronaut, Katie Coleman. I did not actually interview her for this, but I was struck by the quote. She said, "The Earth is our ship, space is our home." And it is both our present home and our future home in that we're already in space on our spaceship Earth. And we will be moving out into outer space, and it will become a different kind of home. However, she's not the first astronaut who's made a statement like that. Many astronauts have talked about how they felt so comfortable out there. They felt it was home. They wanted to go back. And I have to admit, it's a bit of a mystery why they say that. There is something about humans, and I believe it may well be embedded in our DNA, that even though it's a harsh and dangerous environment, there's a part of us that knows that's where we ought to be. That, I've other astronauts have compared it to birth. And of course, when you're in your mother's womb, it's comfortable, it's easy, it's completely designed for you. And when you're born, it's traumatic, it's scary. Somebody slaps you on the you know what, and there are lights. And as we all know, life on Earth is not that easy. And there's a lot of people who talk about returning to the womb. And somehow I think humanity as a species knows we've got to do this. And that's why it feels comfortable, even though it shouldn't.
I guess some of the parallel that can be made with when we're in the ocean, or some of the people who've been in the water, in this sense of almost we came from there, or we've lived there for so long. There's all like you never leave that connection, and if we're made of star dust, these molecules have been traveling and been recycled over several billions of years. I guess inherently at the core of those molecules is still that connection to the stars.
I think you've characterized it correctly, and I agree with you. For those who don't really get it about outer space, they don't know why we like you and I, why we're so fascinated. Think about why is it that people want to go to the beach? Why are people so drawn to the ocean? There's something about humans that draws them there. It's very similar if you think about it, Daniel, because you can't go into the ocean for a long period of time. Certainly, you cannot go underwater without special equipment. It is potentially a dangerous environment, and yet people go there, not just in ships or in other ways, but they want to be close to the water. And as you say, there's something potentially about our past evolution that makes us want to go back there. And maybe there's something about our future evolution that makes us want to go out. I think we always have to think about evolution, though, because it's really central, excuse me. It's really
No
central
worries.
to our life. I mean, If we know anything, if you're a scientist and if you're a Buddhist, you might think those two are very far apart, but Buddhism teaches that nothing is permanent. Scientists know that evolution is just natural, and um, it's you can't really think about life without evolution and change.
I wrote in my book Fill the Wild that there's this entry about water or connection to water, and I hypothesized if that's why we build skyscrapers so that from the top we can be reminded of where we come from the ocean, from the water. So ultimately,
Yeah,
the only reason why we build up is that we
without,
can see the ocean from the city.
yeah. I think it's true. And I read somewhere, and I only say this as a layperson, I'm not a scientist of any kind in this field, that dolphins, whales, cetaceans are descended from land animals. Well, sea animals who became land animals and then said, "This is not for us," and went back. And again, why would that happen? Because in fact, being a mammal in the water is pretty hard life.
Yeah.
My wife and I took a dolphin tour in Florida, and the tour guide said, "Did you know that dolphins can only put half their brain asleep?" And we said, "No." And he said, "Well, they're mammals. They have to think about rising up and breathing.
Yeah.
If they went to sleep, they'd drown just like you would." And you think, wow, from an evolutionary point of view, if it's true, they traded a fairly straightforward life on land for going back to the water. Um, yeah.
Now, you the second question is actually the premise of your book, but the second question is, what do you think going to space is gonna teach us with some of the insights that stepping into the outer space
Mm-hmm.
and looking back at the Earth will give us? And you wrote a book, and the overview effect is all about that. So, do you want to kind of? I know that you're known for the overview effect, but for the audience, can you tell a little bit more about that?
Sure. The overview effect is a term that came to mind for me when I was flying cross country and looking out at the Earth. And I was thinking about life off the planet, always seeing the Earth in the sky. And I had an epiphany, I think I would call it, that people who had that experience would understand fully that the Earth is a planet, it's a whole system, everything is interconnected, everything is interrelated. And this is a understanding that surface dwellers are trying to get to. We know this intellectually, we feel it, and yet we don't experience it. And my question couldn't be answered about people of the future who are going to live there permanently. So I began to interview astronauts as proxies. And what I began to learn from them is that seeing the Earth in this way and then seeing the universe as the context of the Earth was not an ordinary experience. It was a bit of a shock. They learned a lot. And when we say learn, we do have to think about it in the sense that they say to me when I interview them over and over again, "I knew there were no borders or boundaries on the planet, but it's still amazing to see it that way, not to see the divisions that we take so seriously." And one of the constant refrains is, no matter how different that person next to you is from you, they're really similar to you. Being human is such a common denominator, and you feel it. I suppose I haven't done it yet, but you feel it so strongly when you're looking down or looking back, I guess it is, from orbit or from the moon. These divisions that are so much a part of our brain that we don't even have to think about it, it's just there for us, become unimportant. The other thing that's important that we learn is how extraordinary our spaceship Earth is. The, it's interesting. When I first started interviewing astronauts, I focused so much on their experience of the Earth that I didn't think much about their experience of the universe. Astronauts see the Earth in a way that you and I haven't seen it yet. Um, I emphasize yet, since I think we'll get there. But
I hope so.
yeah, I know that's our goal. Um, they see it in a way that we haven't seen it, and the vast majority of people haven't had that experience. But then, after I was maybe working on the third edition of the book, I realized they also see the cosmos in a way that no one has ever seen it. And they see the stars in a way that's new and different. And they begin to understand as they look out how unique the planet we live on is. William Shatner, who is not a professional astronaut, I think communicated that in very dramatic language after he went on Blue Origin. He maybe overstated it, but he said, out there, it's death. And here below, it's light and life. But uh, it is interesting in terms of what will we learn. Perhaps we will learn something that will be a survival lesson. And you know this better than most because of your interest in nature. The fact that we're here is really pretty extraordinary. And it's pretty fragile. The earth may not be that fragile, but our life, our civilization, our species is. So we'll learn that, I think.
You talk in your book about how giving context to Earth and planet, the being in space. Obviously, the astronaut looking back and seeing for the first time planet Earth in context of the solar system. That it's just not this world, but it's this world in connection with the blackness and the other moons, and how it would not exist if it wasn't for all of the other planets around, the Jupiter and Saturn and even the moon. And trying to express that, you write this passage about how a fish who would step out of the water and try to explain to the other fish behind what it is to be outside
Yeah.
the lives, like it would be so hard, and maybe there's not even a language to express, to communicate that.
Yeah.
And the astronaut are not necessarily guilty of not being good communicators, but they're more kind of victim of experiencing something that so far we don't have the capacity to process and
Right.
understand.
Yeah, the explorer fish metaphor has become pretty popular with readers of the book because they can see it, they get it. And as far as we know, again, from an evolutionary point of view, there was an explorer fish, or maybe there were 10 of them. We don't know. But there were these fish who maybe accidentally, or maybe they were being chased by predators, we don't know. They flopped up onto land and kept going back until they could live on land. And obviously, the idea of going back and trying to explain land to fish who really didn't even fully understand water, uh, you can imagine them saying, "Oh, that's really interesting, but don't we have enough problems here in the ocean?" And that's what we see every day. Uh,
That's what we see. I even wrote about that the other day, like that same kind of reaction when we came down from the trees.
yeah,
You know, I can only imagine the tribe or the group of individuals who were living up in the trees, and then first couple of explorers,
yeah,
would decide to go and venture down into an environment where the predators were of a total different scale and they were not really physically adapted for that. I mean, they could move their way around, but they were not like where we are today. And so the ones who were left not behind but above would tell these individuals like, don't you think that we have enough problems? Why are you risking the integrity of the group? Why are you going to risk something that is just so like kind of almost useless?
Yeah. And yet, that is how we evolve. New information, we get new information, we adapt to new circumstances, and we do evolve. One thing I'd like to say too, because this is probably the right time to say it, I've been doing a lot of consideration of the question of, is it perhaps not just a nice thing to do for some, I don't know, several thousand adventurers to go live on Mars or whatever you might imagine, but is it perhaps the answer to preserving our species and our planet for very large numbers of people to migrate, in the sense that if you look at some of the studies that have been done, like Limits to Growth, which came out in the 1970s and was quite powerful, and some of the other work that's being done, there's a pretty good case to be made that the planet as it's now constituted is going to have a very hard time supporting our advanced technological civilization, our high levels of population, etc. What if the solution to many of the problems on Earth is in fact large-scale space migration? And is that not something we should at least look at, not as an escape, but as an answer? That's a reasonable
Absolutely,
question.
absolutely. I mean, you got. I mean, you're into my realm, and at this point, this is the way nature has always worked.
Yeah.
Whether it's, if you look at wolves, at one point the family becomes too big that some of the males or the group will fraction, and then they have to go and find another territory because now there's not enough resources for that group of wolves. But it's not just wolves, it's for every single species.
Yeah.
And even when the Europeans left, or whether it was indigenous who found themselves, who were in North America before, they were not all living into one unique area. They spread all over the continent. Why? Because obviously they were competing on the resources, and they had to figure out how to claim their own space.
Yeah.
And when the Europeans left Europe, it was to save Europe. Europe was in total shambles in terms of resources, and a lot of people, the settlers, were willing to give up everything that they had on the promise of starting something new. And it's just that for us, it's hard to understand that now the planet has become kind of to its capacity of what we can do with it, and we have to look into the stars of the outer space. But this is exactly what I wrote, how we are going to space not because we want to, because nature wants to go. It's nature's next journey. It's been looking for this time for 4.6 billion years, ever since the beginning of a single cell. It's been pushing and evolving and adapting so that it could spread.
Right.
And if what kind of makes the human species successful, it's our capacity to share information through stories or through generations. And if you look at the planet Earth, it's knowledge, it's life. And if you look at the universe, which you do in your book, the Cosma Hypothesis, the universe is almost kind of a living organism, and it itself also wants life to connect. It wants the information to connect.
Right.
So we have this duty, this responsibility to export that knowledge and take it to new places.
Right.
Which is, you want to tell more a little bit about the Cosma Hypothesis,
Right.
which is your second book?
Yeah, that grew out of the work I was doing on the overview effect. And it's interesting the evolution of that book as opposed to the overview effect in the sense that I mentioned in the published book that I have a manuscript that I was writing in 1988 called the Cosma Hypothesis. The overview effect came out in 1987. And at that time, I had a plan to write 10 books about space exploration. And at that time, I actually did write one other one that was on the list, the SETI factor. That's about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And shameless plug, the second edition of that is out now. Uh, uh, the first edition was published in 1990, and it's been updated and revised. But in any event, the Cosma Hypothesis was aimed at answering the question you've just been talking about, which is what is the purpose of human space exploration? And it was based on an insight that whenever we talked about purpose back in those days, 87, 88, we talked about the benefit to humanity. Oh, Apollo, they had to make better computers, so we got computers out of it. Or uh, people always joke about non-stick frying pans and things like that. And NASA has published a list of spinoffs every year. And that's certainly true. We get those spinoffs. But it hit me like a ton of bricks that it's all about us. And what about the universe? Or what about the Earth? Or what about the solar system? What is the purpose of human exploration that benefits the environment we're in? And that is what the Cosma Hypothesis is about. And the hypothesis, for which I have scant evidence, honestly, but the hypothesis is close to what you were talking about, which is we bring life and self-awareness and intelligence outward, and the universe becomes more alive, more intelligent, more self-aware. And you asked me once before, why do I call the universe Cosma? And it's just because I wanted it to be more feminine, nurturing in nature, but also I wanted people to think of it as a living thing, as a living information system, actually. And so when I talk about purpose, I'm not being a theologian. I'm really talking, again, environmentally. Every species fills a niche and does something for the environment. And so I could be wrong. My hypothesis could be wrong, but the the question is something everybody should ask. What are we bringing to the adventure? And it may seem like a stretch to ask why are we important to the universe, but for a long time we just thought that seeing ourselves as a partner with the earth it seemed out of place. Well, what are you talking about? And yet now we do, I think, increasingly see ourselves interconnected with the planet in a way that we didn't 100 years ago or 200 years ago. So I believe it's possible for human consciousness to get to that point. Um, and that's why I was exploring it. And for data, if you will, I went back to all my astronaut interviews. I pulled out what they said about the stars, about the universe, not about the Earth, but about the cosmos.
So the overview effect, and because you were talking about obviously the connection to these other planets, the overview effect is looking back at the Earth and realizing where we come from, the fact that there are no boundaries from that point of view, the connection of between the oceans and the land, and everything is under this little tiny planet, all our evolution. But also you talk about the Copernican perspective, which is looking out and understanding that same level of connection, but throughout these even bigger planets. And I was reading this morning, not reading, I was watching something about the moon. Obviously, the moon is in orbit because it's falling fast around the planet.
Yeah.
But also the sun is falling, not the sun, the planet Earth is falling around the sun, and the sun itself is falling on a much bigger scale. So all these elements everywhere are falling, and yet this magical celestial dance as we're all turning with each other and kind of moving forward into, I guess, these uncharted waters, spatial waters.
Yeah.
But the connection, obviously, there's a lot of theories that say that life came to be on Earth because of the moon. The moon was creating this push and pull of the water, and then some of the fish find themselves stuck, in little tide pools. So you have the moon that is helping on the life. You have Jupiter, this massive planet that pulls a lot of the universe, the solar system together. And again, we have theories that without Jupiter, maybe there would not be life on this planet. So all that we have on Earth is connected to all these seemingly disconnected elements in the solar system. And I guess that's the point with the Copernican perspective, correct?
Yeah. I'm sure as a writer, you know what I mean when I say, I don't know what I know till I write about it. And
Yes.
so I start with an idea. Of course, you have to have some idea of where you're going. You could never write a book. But I'm always surprised, and this is true in fiction and nonfiction, I'm always surprised at where the writing goes. It hopefully will always go along unforeseen paths. In other words, exploration, as we're talking about. And one of the insights that occurred as I was writing the first edition of the book was, okay, there's the overview effect. You've established that, what happens in orbit or even going to the moon. But what's really profound here is space exploration, that is moving further and further from the Earth, is a constant change in consciousness. And after the overview effect is the Copernican perspective. The reason I mentioned Copernican was he was the first European to really state that we're part of a solar system. And we are. And what you just talked about is an interesting area of research. And that is, what is the impact of Jupiter on planet Earth? Most people don't ask that question. There are people studying Jupiter, and they know a lot about Jupiter, but they may or may not talk about its impact on Earth. There are people who study the moon, and they do see there's an Earth-Moon system. But what is the meaning of the solar system in terms of who we are, where we are, and the consciousness we have? And so people ask me, well, what about the people on Mars? Will they experience the overview effect? And that's a really good question, but the answer may be surprising. And that is no, not really, not in the same way, because the overview effect, the way it's been defined, is seeing the Earth as a whole system. You're seeing the continents, you're seeing the oceans, you're not seeing borders and boundaries. People living on Mars aren't going to see that. They're going to see a point of light in the sky. They will need a telescope to see detail. So as we've talked about the overview effect, no, I would say they will see the Earth as part of the solar system. It will be more the Copernican point of view. And, we've all, I hope all of us have heard the beautiful commentary by Carl Sagan about that view of the Earth taken from far out in the distant reaches of the solar system. And he called it a pale blue dot.
Yeah.
When I look at that picture, it looks like a molecule. Doesn't look like
Like a star, yeah, like a planet.
yeah. Um, Well, this is exciting because it means what are we going to get out of exploration? Well, changes in awareness. And this goes back to your first question. What will we learn? What will we learn? Part of what's exciting about exploration and consciousness is that you don't know. And I had a great interview with Don Pettit, who's an astronaut. Even today, he's the oldest active astronaut. And he's in his 60s and he's still qualified to fly and he wants to. And we were talking about, people say, okay, what's the result of exploration? On February 29th, what's the output? And you say, we don't know. You don't know? No, we don't know. And this is a lesson we have to keep learning. I mean, whether it's medical research or exploring outer space or meditation, whatever form of exploring you do, or even writing, you don't know the answer beforehand. So that's a good thing. And yet, somehow it makes us very uncomfortable not to know what people living on Mars will learn. And that's why we write science fiction, is we want to think about it in some sort of um, non-objective way. I mean, we don't have to prove this is how they'll think. We're imagining it.
It will be interesting. I mean, finding ourselves on a new planet and making the difference between science fiction, all these years of science fiction, and the reality of it.
Yeah.
There's always a romantic idea of what life is, and then there's the reality of it.
Yeah.
And, when people left, again, making a parallel, when people left Europe, great, the promise of a new beginning, a, a, a travel on the sea, but then the reality of the mundane, the feeding yourself, the establishing your shelter, the routine of making sure that everything is in place and that the oxygen supply is taken care of. Those are the reality of
Right.
the future. In the same way that back in the days when we kind of drew a picture of the future, there were spaceships, but we never thought about all the satellites all like around the earth giving all the technology.
Hmm.
And now we have to deal with the reality.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier about, will the overview effect be experienced on the planet Mars? And the reality is no. In the same way that when you fly on the plane, you start from the ground, you get up, and then when you travel, you do have that perspective. But the minute that you land back where you at your destination, then you're back on the ground, and then obviously that perspective is behind you.
Right.
And it will be the same, the same thing as when we get to Mars. The departure, the travel, experiencing that connection through space and through that solar system will give us the opportunity to experience something that was just changed the way that we see life. But once we get onto the planet, then it's going to go back to, great, now we need to survive, we need to figure out, we don't have the luxury of really thinking too much. We need to establish ourselves and make sure that we live until tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's part of that's part of the other reality that I really learned about from talking to the astronauts. They do retain that perspective, but they do also quickly adjust back to life on the surface. And that's an important thing to realize. That is to say, when you're in orbit, you see the unity and oneness of the Earth. And in your mind, you know that it's chaotic and diverse once you go back. And then, indeed, when you go back, you very quickly come back to that very, very different experience. And both are true. The unity is there, the diversity is there, and that's hard for us to hold in our minds, two very apparently different realities, and yet they're the same reality. Different perspective, same
Correct.
reality.
Now, I want to change a little bit of the discussion about something that you and I we talked. In fact, I wrote a little bit about this. I think you might be reading more about it,
Yeah.
about how last year, 2021, was truly a tipping year in our relationship with space. Even though the technology and some of the groundbreaking achievements were way back in the 60s, and then there was a space shuttle and it came down. But the elements of what happened last year really tipped the reality, and now it will, what is ahead of us is just going to be a golden era of space innovations and space travel and space discoveries.
Yeah. You're right. That was an amazing year. It really was. And of course, it was also the second year of the pandemic. So how extraordinary that all of it happened at that time. But I've been waiting for that for a long time, ever since I wrote the first edition of the book, because it was so clear from talking to professional astronauts that it would be a remarkable thing if people like you and I could have this experience, either by going into orbit or on a suborbital hop, or if advanced virtual reality could come into being. And really, both things began to happen almost simultaneously. And we won't ever go back. We will never return to the time before that, in the sense that it is now, I think the momentum is there to keep this going. And the commentary on what happened last year, in my mind, was often misguided, because it was easy to talk about billionaires having a space race. Very easy metaphor, something people can relate to. However, to me, it was more like Sputnik, in the sense that I was 13, I think, when Sputnik flew, and the Russians, the Soviets, had been saying they were going to put up a satellite, and nobody believed them. Nobody believed it. And then when it happened, it was really a shock. And the reaction was fear. It wasn't humanity has gone into outer space. It was the Soviet Union, the Russians have gone into outer space, at least in America.
Correct.
And so the reaction was very much of its time. And yet what was really happening was humanity had begun this great adventure that we're talking about. So similarly, the reaction was Sir Richard Branson is a billionaire, and Elon Musk is a billionaire, and on and on and on. Jeff Bezos is a billionaire. Well, of course, that was important because they were able to fund the activity.
Yeah.
But from my point of view, what I saw was the overview effect is now an experience that many, many, many people can have. And if I'm right, it will change society dramatically for the better.
Absolutely.
That's what I saw.
Absolutely.
But, just to close on this point, we see what we know. And so I've spent 35 years thinking about this moment, 2021. So I was ready to see it in a certain way. The people writing about the billionaire space race had not been doing that. They had been on a different path. And so they saw what their experience, background, and training brought them to see. And so it's part of our job, really, is to help people see this new space age in a different way.
Which you've been doing amazingly well. You've created an overview roundtable a year plus ago. You've seen it evolve from a concentrated tribe of space geek nerds to a complex community of people from all different backgrounds. And even you and I, you being in the space for 35 years, me being a solo wilderness expedition and in the more nature aspect, and here we are, talking about moving into outer space. So obviously the dialogue has evolved and spread, and it's changing. There's a lot of people coming to the table and bring their own perspective.
Yeah.
Frank, I want to be mindful of your time.
Yeah.
We've been together for 45 minutes. I want to close before we tell the audience where to find you. I want to end on your involvement with a nonprofit that is really dear to your heart, Space for Humanity, which is over the last year, also because of 2021 and because of all the attention, has grown to new level, has received some funding from Bezos or from
Brand.
Mackenzie Scott. I can't remember.
Well, Branson and
About.
Bezos, actually, yeah, I'd say.
Okay. Giving them resources and outlets that were just dreamed of. So, can you kind of end with what is Space for Humanity quickly, and what is in the pipeline for the organization?
Yeah, so I'm on the board of advisors of Space for Humanity, and I think it fits nicely not only as a single organization, but as a sort of a predictor of the future. Once we understand that this perspective can change consciousness, it then becomes possible to use the technology to create the perspective in order to change consciousness. And that's a big break from what space agencies had done. Astronauts who flew on NASA space flights didn't go to experience the overview effect. They went to do other things. And when they came back, they weren't expected to do anything in particular for the society. Well, Space for Humanity is a model where you get chosen to go based on what you'll do when you come back. And part of the obligation is we will pay for your trip to experience the overview effect, and then you're obligated to come back and do something that makes the world a better place on Earth. So it's a
Wow.
tool. And as Dylan Taylor says, and he is the founder of Space for Humanity, going back to your question, 3 words to describe space, Dylan says space is a place for transformation. It's a tool of transformation. And that is something that humanity has that we've never had before, which is an experience that we can shape that can transform individuals and society. What an amazing process that is. And, you and I are lucky
Absolutely.
enough to live when it's happening. What
Yes.
a trip.
Yes. What a trip. So I understand that right now people can apply to become an astronaut until February 15, correct?
I think that's correct.
What an amazing opportunity that the foundation will give to people. I mean, we're there. This is happening. This is not just whether it's going to be with Blue Origin or I mean all these new players that are getting into the not going to call it the race, but the reality of it.
Right.
But absolutely amazing. Now, Frank, Cosma Hypothesis is available. The overview effects fourth
Okay.
edition.
Yeah.
Um, anything else that is coming up for you?
Well, don't forget that actually there is an overview trilogy. There's also the new Camelot, and all of these are available on Multiverse Publishing on their website. And yeah,
That's right. You're a new
yeah,
publisher.
my new publisher. And there is a huge new interest in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And I do believe the SETI factor, which has been revised and is coming out with at least one new interview and several new ideas in it, I think that's going to be far more interesting to people now than it was back in 1990 when I wrote it. So
Yeah,
there's always a new book being written.
we can't wait.
Okay.
I will put the link to your website in the comments and also the links to your books. People can find you also on LinkedIn. Are you on Instagram? Try to a
Yeah,
little
I'm
bit.
on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
Okay. Excellent. Are you on TikTok? I'm not on
I'm
TikTok. Are
not
you on
on
TikTok?
TikTok, but I'm an explorer, so I'm gonna try TikTok.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm gonna leave that exploration to others. I find
Okay.
TikTok to be to be
All
headache.
right.
Frank, Thank you so very much for your time and for
Thank
your
you, Daniel.
insight. Thank you for giving the world a way to express and to interpret the experience of going to space. I'm pretty sure that the astronauts were busy with experiments on their own, and you were able to give them a structure to express to capture their emotions. So on behalf of the world, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
We will see you on the road this year, hopefully,
Yep.
as we start to travel. And I look forward to catching up in person. So, Frank,
Same
thank you.
here. Thank you, Daniel. Bye bye.